What is up, guys? It is me again, back for another episode of Scythe versus the second, and this time with much less background noise. I apologize for the Zami God Wars version. This one, as you can see, is the Sarah God Wars Scythe versus, and I gotta say, this is not the place for the Scythe. Now I'm gonna get into details why, but there's a couple main reasons. Now, the first being, we talked about this in the Zami episode. If you haven't seen it, go back, watch it, maybe. Definitely a place for the Scythe there, but this place, because of how the fight with Zilyana works, Starlight is consistently walking under Zilyana. She's a much bigger, he or she, whatever that dang unicorn is a much bigger problem for Sarah God Wars than the melee minion is for Zami. It is very hard, and it's something that, unless you're running a full team of Scythes, which I don't know why you would, because, we'll get into reasons later, but you wouldn't do that. Starlight will just end up underneath the boss at some point. Now, does the Scythe outcompete with a lot of, basically common methods? Like you see here, my team was using Varix. Yeah, I was, toe to toe with the Varix. I've definitely got more kills than the Varix set, probably a little less than I expected, to be honest. Zilly's def is not incredibly high, but the Scythe only hits her twice. That's right. The Scythe only hits Commander Zilyana twice. So you're already missing out on a huge chunk of the Scythe's DPS. Now, the funny thing about Sarah God Wars is, if you look around the boss room and you see, okay, Zilyana, not a 3x3, Scythe only hits twice. Guess what does hit 3 times? Scythe hits 3 times on Growler, the mage minion, which I thought was rather interesting. Not exactly something that, well, let's put it this way. It's not something that, really ends up mattering. Growler's the minion you usually kill last, at least the teams that I go on do. It doesn't really come into play where you want to be really bursting Growler down. But if you want to, you can. Growler dies real fast because you hit 3 times, because Growler's just long enough. So, end all be all, here's why I will not be bringing the Scythe back to Sarah God Wars. The reason is the Twisted Bow. The Twisted Bow is insane at Sarah God Wars. Now, I've never actually used it, but I've watched enough and talked to people enough to know, and looked at stats enough to know, the Twisted Bow is meant for Sarah God Wars. Not only is range just the better option here, because it's so much easier to keep Zilly at distance, and you can basically trade back and forth if you're smart. If you have another person with a Twisted Bow, you can basically bounce Zilly back and forth between you. But, all that being said, her mage level is massive. Obviously, her secondary attack, or your primary, it kind of depends on who you ask, but one of her 2 main attacks is a mage attack, so she does have quite a high mage level, so the Twisted Bow absolutely shreds here. And that's why the Scythe's not good here. Anyone who has a Scythe, you ought to have a Twisted Bow. If you don't have a Twisted Bow and you have a Scythe, why are you doing Zami God Wars anyway? And by Zami, I mean Sarah, of course, but that's basically the deal. If you're pet hunting, or doing something like that, I honestly, I can't recommend you use the Scythe at Sarah God Wars. Now, a couple things, again, that I'll just kind of go over. A couple, just kind of recap the negatives of the Scythe here. Doesn't hit Zilly 3 times. Starlight is a big pain in the butt, because Starlight is always switching aggro, and because you're always changing tank, it's not something you can predict. And yes, if you're good enough, you could definitely run around and make sure you're keeping track of Starlight, and keep Starlight from essentially walking under the boss. But with a casual team that's just, kind of going there and, doing its thing, it's really hard to keep Starlight out of the picture. So definitely a big issue there. Again, the main reason, though, the Twisted Bow is just so much better. So when it comes down to rating the Scythe at Sarah God Wars, I thought about for a while whether we would be giving this rating based on the fact that you can use the Twisted Bow. I'm going to go ahead and say that your main method at Sarah God Wars, I don't know if my friends are exactly on par with the methods these days using Varix. I will say this. Using the Scythe had a huge impact on my prayer. I was running out of prayer so often compared to the people in Varix sets. And again, they got a lot of the kills. It's not like I was getting every single kill like at Zami God Wars. These guys were stealing kills, and they weren't really stealing them. We were doing relatively similar damage, so the fact that they were able to basically not use any supplies while SGS healing and Guthin's healing on the minions, and I was chugging through prayer potions because I wasn't wearing good prayer bonus armor, that's just another downside for the Scythe setup. Now, I could run in with a full Varix set and use the Scythe as my main weapon. I don't know if that's exactly the best idea. So, anyway, all those negatives taken into account, we're not going to compare the Scythe in this rating. We're not going to give the 5. We set our baseline with, you know, we'll say the Varrox set is a 5. That's your, you know, middle of the ground. It's what most people use. It's cheap. It's effective. The Twisted Bow gets a 10. I'm going to go ahead and give the Scythe, honest to God, a 4. It's way too expensive for what it does. It just doesn't do enough damage. To make it really count, a D-Warhammer spec does wonders, but if you D-Warhammer spec, everything else is also benefiting from it, and it just seems like the Scythe is really just a huge waste of time. So if you love Sarah God Wars, maybe you're pet hunting, maybe you're looking to, I don't know, just get really high Sarah God Wars kill count, or because it's still pretty good money, even though it's the most boring God Wars dungeon in the game, the Scythe is not the weapon for you. Grab a Twisted Bow and grab one other friend with a Twisted Bow, and you will have a much, much better time. So that's it for this episode of Scythe Versus, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, there are videos out every day on the channel this week, all covering various places you can use the Scythe of Vitter from the Theater of Blood in Old School RuneScape. And there's a Let's Play going up as well later in the afternoon. So tune in back to the channel at 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern for those video releases, guys, every day this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Fucking Starlight! Fuck off!
So we need cheese spells.
Woo! Let's go, boy!
Ooh. Hey! Holy shit, we got some. What?
Yeah.
Alright, you two, who'd you pay?
What happened?
Why don't you look in the chat?
Who did you pay?
Nice! Let's fucking go split.